Another cloud consulting journal, and I have with me today Kyle Bowerman, someone I've known. So I followed you at Appirio. I didn't know you then. I met you at
Yep.
Appirio,
Yep.
and time went on, and then you are currently a colleague of mine at Atrium
Yep.
AI. Um, Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So, looking at your career, how did you first get into consulting?
Well, what was his name? Frank something. I I was at my last place. I was at U.S. Cellular, and I was actually there as a router jockey. Um, in the process of doing that, I realized that when they were ordering circuits for the retail stores, that there's a team like, I don't know, 15 people or so. They would order the circuit and they would put it on a spreadsheet and then they would literally mail it to everyone.
Right.
This is kind of before there was any sort of, file storage share. And everyone would open it up and make their edits and mail it out. So I kind of saw like, oh man, this is bad. So I had done some lamp stack stuff before. So I created just this little app to manage not just the retail stores, but all the circuits. Because I actually didn't work on the retail part of it. I worked on the backbone, the ATM network. So I just kind of built this little app and it got legs. And then I built another app to measure the round trip time from all the routers pinging each other, and created this heat map of what the latency was and a couple other things. And as a router guy, they're like, okay, you got a choice. You got to go either in the full-time support these systems that you're building and continue to do that, or you got to be a router guy and give this stuff up. So what is your choice? So I kind of felt like, oh my god, the future is routers. What am I? This is a stupid idea to give this up, and I'm just an amateur programmer at best. So I did that, and I made that choice, and I liked it. And in the process, had a couple consultants that were working with me on some of the stuff, and we found ourselves we'd switched over to Ruby on Rails and kind of like found ourselves didn't have a term for it, but building a platform instead of actually building exactly. And it was, of course, it was a crappy platform, um, but we knew that like the concept of let's build something that we can build something in. And so that guy like took another job and at this consulting company, because that's what he was a independent consultant, and they're working on this thing called Salesforce, and he kind of described, he's like, you got to check this out, man. It's like this thing that you can build apps in, and that was, I was intrigued by that. So I actually went over to join him at Appirio because I just wanted to figure out like what the Salesforce thing was, and I was super intrigued by it. So
Yeah. How was the jump from working for a company to working for a company that works for companies?
um, it was pretty eye opening, right? So you don't have the liberty of hiding your skeletons because no one's going to see them. So, but you also have this. You don't have to live with the skeletons either, right? You can, every 6 months or 9 months or whatever, like you can just leave your project and start brand new and screw up the next one. So that's always kind of a liberating feeling, is these fresh starts. It's like
Right.
getting a divorce every year or something, I guess. I don't know.
I would say, consultants get paid to solve problems and then create new ones,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then another firm gets hired to. So you were an early person at Appirio.
Yep.
You were there a long time. Eventually, and I wanted to talk to you about this because I think you're one of the foremost experts in this subject, is crowdsourcing.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about how did Appirio get into crowdsourcing? What did you think of it, and what did you see the evolution of crowdsourcing?
So we got in it. I didn't know anything about it. We had just, I guess it was Narinder who kind of knew about Topcoder and kind of thought to recreate that same sort of thing specifically for Salesforce. And he got Dave Bessinger, who was just a awesome guy, and we had Jeff Douglas, who was the first Salesforce MVP and just another great, awesome guy. And so they started building their own crowdsourcing platform on Salesforce. And I don't know, somewhere I was asked my opinion of it, and I think I was a little bit skeptical and said, well, if you do it the right way and you can, reuse some of the assets that you create and so forth, then I think it can work. And apparently that was what they were looking for, a skeptic to kind of poke holes in it, is the story that they tell me anyway. But I don't remember being that skeptical, but I'm not naturally an optimist. We like to call ourselves realists, but that's the engineer in me to
Right.
kind of plan for the worst. So we built with Jeff and Dave and Sal marketing, and then myself, built Cloud Spokes, which was kind of our own version, smaller, from the ground up, of Topcoder. And of course, Dave Messenger, he knew everything there was to know about how to build that, how to get the community, and one thing left to another, and the price was right on Topcoder itself, so we ended up buying Topcoder. Um, I think they had like 1.5 million members at that time, or something, or close to it. And so the determination was, their name is bigger than ours. Let's keep the Topcoder brand
Right.
and all that. So Appirio ended up purchasing Topcoder, and that's the end of the story. That's all there is to it.
Well, it was Topcoder was an older company, right? It was around
Yeah,
long before Appirio,
yeah.
right? And
Oh yeah. Then it was 15 years old when we bought it, and it really started like building J2EE components. It was like, wow, that's kind
right,
of, no one does that anymore. But you get the idea, and .NET stuff when that came out. So it was a lot of old legacy infrastructure and technology that they were building directly.
right, yeah. So Topcoder, I was I was in marketing at Appirio when
Yeah,
Topcoder started
I
really
remember it
ramping
well.
up, and well, let me just say this. We were talking about consulting firms before we started this episode, and I was saying how a lot of consulting firms do basically the same thing, right?
Yeah,
They have talent, they put up offerings, there's always a managed service.
yeah,
It, in some ways, it's a pretty boring business. It's hard to find a
yeah,
lot of innovation. And the one thing I could say, especially about Narinder and about Appirio at that time, is they really tried to do something new by bringing crowdsourcing and
yeah,
combining with cloud computing. Um, I was skeptical as a marketer at the time because I have a technical background. I'm like, there's a lot of things on the Salesforce platform you can't crowdsource.
yep,
And I said that in marketing, and I was like, well, what are you talking about? It's like, well, you configure the case object. There's one way to do it. You can't
right.
have 50 people do it and see which one's the best, right? It's so it was a great attempt, but an awkward fit. What do you think Topcoder did well, and what did it not do well?
So I think I'm with you, right? So one of my speeches with new customers when I was at Topcoder was, there's a sweet spot of, don't try to do everything, and unfortunately that's one of the things that they did wrong, is they claimed that they could do everything, and maybe theoretically they could, but they couldn't do everything well. So the right thing is to figure out what is your sweet spot, and it's actually different for per customer.
Right,
And when customers like first hear about crowdsourcing, they're kind of like, I don't know if it fits for us. And but you could talk to what their challenges are, and you can quickly you can give them some ideas of what worked well in crowdsource, and then all of a sudden you can see it in their eyes and the ball rolling. And like, for example, I went down to Columbia to meet with one of our customers. There is a big bank in Columbia, and they were just not really sold. And so we started talking about what are the challenges that they had, and they're like, well, we're building this API, and we're a bank, so we can't really build an API, for it's just, I don't think it's gonna work. We can't crowdsource that, right? We're a bank. And so we're like, well, tell me more. What do you need? Where's the hard part? And he's like, well, we actually have the payload first, but we need to actually build the Swagger from the payload itself, and it's like a really slow, terrible, painful process. And I said, oh, it's a great example. You take that payload, you can crowdsource that, do a first to finish, and then, in 4 hours or by tomorrow morning, you'll have exactly what you need. So they're like, really? Yeah. And so we wrote it up on the spot, and we had a co-pilot standing by, and we were able to launch that. And in the morning, they're like, and we saw 3 entries in the morning, and they're like, this is
Wow.
amazing. And that's what I said. Like, it's all about what is the sweet spot. Another one that we really liked a lot is when companies are trying to decide between different technologies, and we would run challenges for bake-offs and just say, like, put Angular 1 versus Angular 2 versus React, and on top of Salesforce, what are the pros and cons of each? And so you kind of get this unadulterated opinion of these different experts that you can kind of choose, different points of view from different people, and you can really kind of paint a picture of what you what are the pros and cons to move forward with a technology decision. I think that's pretty impressive to do that in a short
Yeah.
amount of time.
Yeah. That is interesting.
Oh, and what did they not do? So I think what they did not do well is they went after big enterprise customers, and I always felt like it's the startups that really
Mm,
could really benefit and use it without having to build up a team. But that was too hard. That was a tricky part of it's easy to sell the big enterprise, big dollar ticket items to big enterprises, but not
yeah.
necessarily for startups. So, and I always wanted that we would sell to startups, but we would, instead of paying for it directly, we would get some sort of stake in that startup, and
Wow.
but never happened that way.
That's a good idea, actually. Um, I remember when I was in marketing at Appirio, we had to come up with this some kind of a graphic, and I was like, well, why don't we use Topcoder? And they said, oh, it will take too long, it'll be too expensive, and we'll get junk back. I was like, we're trying
Yeah,
to market this,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
uh, I don't know. Um, do you
Oh,
think
wait, sorry.
yes,
Here's another example. So I had mentioned one of the types was a first to finish, which is basically just like it sounds.
yeah,
It's a very simple Boolean. It either works or it doesn't. There's no
yeah,
really kind of quality behind it. And I was writing a status report on a Friday and I was looking back to the previous status report of the things that I said I was going to do, and there was a trigger that I totally had forgotten. And it's pretty easy trigger, right? And I could have done it. It would have taken me, 45 minutes or something like that. But I knew that I can literally write this trigger in about five. I could write the challenge in about 5 minutes. So I did that. I launched the challenge. I don't know, $50, $100, something like that.
yeah,
And by the time I finished the status report, I had a submission that worked. And so I was able to say that I got it done, but I
wow,
didn't actually start it until I started writing the status report. So that was that was the kind of a
yeah.
aha moment.
That is amazing. And Appirio no longer exists as an entity, but Topcoder actually does.
Yep.
And in some ways, I wonder if Topcoder is a better fit within Wipro than it was within Appirio.
I think it was. When shortly after the acquisition, Appirio had their offshore development team in India and in Jaipur, and there was a panic that kind of infiltrated the office that crowdsourcing was going to take over their job.
Mm.
And so I was kind of sent out there to say, no, no, it's a tool for you too. You don't. It's not to compete with you. You focus on the things that you can do, you want to do, and you're good at, and you write challenges for things that you're not quite sure of. You don't know where to start. You're looking for opinion you don't like to do or you're not good at. And so one of the women there, said, I've been trying to figure out this kind of JavaScript PDF to run in generator to run inside Salesforce. And I mean, I can't research all of these things. And we said, great example. And again, we wrote the challenge there. I think we made it like 48 hours, and she had, multiple examples. And it was kind of somewhat in the vein of help me choose what JavaScript library to use to generate this PDFs and give me an example of how I can take, um, a dynamic visual force page at the time and generate a PDF and mail it to someone, right? So she had all of that in the challenge. And I said, see, this lets you focus on what's important to you and what you're good at, and let someone else tell you, just use this. And here's the example of exactly how you need to do it. And so I think that was a great example where, the rest of the team saw that and was part of that.
Yeah.
And then kind of realized like, oh, I see. So you're right. It is not really competing against us because there's so much, you can't have a challenge install that and customize it for the customer's org. So it worked out for the best.
Right. Yeah. I do remember having the same feelings when actually CloudSpokes started and I
Yeah.
was a consultant and I had to bill a certain number of hours.
Yep.
So I couldn't really have other people do the work. I had to do
Yeah.
it. So there was kind of an economics problem that had
Yeah.
nothing really to do with if crowdsourcing worked or not. It had to do with me having to fill out a time card every week.
Yeah.
Um, so I think incentives should have been changed, but hindsight's 2020, isn't it?
It is.
So you're at Atrium now.
Yeah. We are.
We are. How long have you been at Atrium, and what brought you to Atrium, and what do you do?
So September was 3 years. Um, what I did, well, so now me and another guy lead kind of a new data engineering team. So data engineering is something we unofficially did, but we didn't really have an organization around it. We have a lot of smart people who write a lot of um, AI ML modeling software in Salesforce or somewhere else. But there's always the plumbing that needs to happen. So that's how I define my role basically a digital plumber. I get bits from one place to another and sometimes change it and move it and make sure they're all there and they all look good and clean. Um, so for the last couple years, I've kind of focused mostly on the custom stuff. Um, like on AWS. Prior to that, did kind of started doing just regular Salesforce code reviews for big bank customer, nothing to do with AI or ML at all. Um, and then worked on this other kind of long term optimizer built in AWS, which was a ton of fun. I really loved that. Really got to focus on my Python skills, and then now the data engineering team. So I'm pretty excited for that.
So to sound ignorant, and I should be listening on company meetings, what is data engineering, and what services are you going to offer?
So the basic services were kind of the pre-sale services are more of kind of a assessment, right? So we're doing that now for one of our customers who went to a 3-to-1 org merge, and they got a lot of bad data, and they don't have good process around their DevOps. So they make changes, and they don't realize they have a problem till it's too late. So they don't trust any of the data, and so they do. There's all these kind of shadow accountancy folks that are, doing their own query and finding their own statistics based on tables that are exported, but the plumbing isn't always right on exporting those tables, so they actually don't trust it from the data store that it comes from. So that's kind of problematic, and really it kind of starts from bad hygiene and not having that data dictionary or that feature store, and not being meticulous about what fields are mapped where, and making sure that that's documented in place in a data dictionary slash feature store that anyone can go and look and see the pedigree of where that where that data came from.
Interesting. By the way, I had no idea Jeff Douglas was the first MVP at
Yeah,
Salesforce. That's a
I
good
was
trivia
told.
question.
Yeah, I was told they, because he had that blog that used to tie Salesforce for the most hits for
Yeah,
various Salesforce. So they decided they needed to show their appreciation somehow to Jeff. So they created the MVP program.
yeah. That is one interesting guy.
Yeah, he's legendary. I love that guy.
Yeah. So, what excites you about technology?
Hmm. I think um, I like to find new ways to do what I used to do less efficiently, right? And I recently kind of picked up Python, and I mean recent as in 5 years. I was a JavaScript guy before that, and it's a beautiful language, and I love the fact of knowing that it's something that there's a Python way to do something, and it's a clean, short, terse way with uh, convention capabilities of the framework itself. So
I've heard people say that about French.
yeah, I think it's the French of programming
It's
languages.
the French of, yes,
Yes.
and yeah, I learned. I remember my first language was C++, which is kind of, it's like the Russian, I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
or maybe the German. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, it was good talking to you. What advice do you have for new consultants, someone out of college looking at um, consulting as a possible career? Since you've done it, right?
Yeah.
You've
So
run the race.
yeah. So I have some cardinal rules that I always feel like. First is you just have to be just painfully honest to the extent where you're doing better for the customer than you may be for your own company, right? You're not going to promote
Mm.
they buy a product if they don't need it, and that's actually gotten me a lot of trouble several times where I said you don't need this, and it's made its way back to Salesforce, and I said, but it's true they don't, and that's why they hired us. And so yeah, I got in trouble for doing that, but in the long term, there was new opportunities for the relationship with that customer and ours. Um, the second one is take fault for everything. Maybe that goes against being blatantly honest, but if you're gonna get blamed anyway as a consultant. So if you fall on your sword and say, no, that's we screwed up. We should have known better. We should have known better that you weren't capable to parse that data like we asked you to, sort of thing. That it makes the friction go down right away. And then the last one I have is to put handles on ideas. Whereas, I mean, you remember at DeVry when we created that map with all of the interfaces of all the integrations, and they were all labeled A1, A2, B1, B3,
Right.
B4. And to the point where people stopped knowing exactly what system they were between, but just knew that the B2 interface was down, and they had that map up on their wall, and they knew exactly what they meant. So that's an important concept. I think is hard for consultants to realize is when you have something that's complicated, like an idea, trying to name that idea by describing it is futile. So it doesn't matter what the name is. You probably even remember the Priyanka method, right? That
Right.
was it stuck. Everyone knew what that meant, but it was not worth explaining what it was and calling that by its title, as an explanation. So we all learn to do those shortcuts, and it really helps put put a handle on ideas.
So in an alternative life, if you weren't doing data engineering at Atrium, what would
Farming,
you be doing? Farming?
yeah, I think so. Or
Okay.
woodworking,
What
or
would, you have
making
many interests?
lures. Yeah, I have a lot of
And you have a
hobbies.
bait company. How is the bait company going?
It's a little bit slow. We just moved, so I've been in most of my stuff has been in storage for 15 months. So
Okay.
I've been a little bit in the hiatus, but I don't make any money. It's a very I don't even try to make money. I just like to make them. It's fun. And that's actually a good point. I think there's a characteristic that draws people to consulting and draws people particularly to programming and consulting is that characteristic of a maker. And what makes me happy is to say, like, look at this, look what I made. And that's those programmers all have that same characteristic, which is really what a maker has too. So
I think that's when consulting is good, when you feel like when you can
yeah,
look back and something was built, but so many times it's pushing around user stories and talking
yeah,
about SOWs and uh, billable hours and scope and what's in Jira.
yeah. Oh my
I
god,
spend an unbelievable amount of time just putting stuff into Jira, and
don't get me
it makes it
started with Jira.
it makes you feel a little existential, like what am I
Yeah,
doing with my life, right?
yeah,
But those times, and I've worked with you at those times when you build something that makes a difference to a company,
yeah,
and it might not seem like a lot in the big picture, but you are making people's lives better by
yeah,
making a company more efficient. You're making the employees' lives a little bit better,
yeah,
and just the ripples down the line isn't exciting. Is what when consulting's at its best, I think.
yeah. Absolutely.
All right, Kyle. Mr. Mochi wants to say bye.
All right. Bye, Mr. Mochi. Good talking
All
to you,
right.
John. You take
Thank you,
care.
sir.
All right. Bye bye.